welcome to In Talks With. I'm Danielle Radoichin, and on this episode I'm delighted to welcome my friend, the journalist Simon Chilvers, who is guest hosting. Simon is talking to two guests, the fashion designer Francesco Risso and the stylist Carlos Nazario, who work together for the Italian fashion house Marni. Founded in 1994 by Consuelo Castiglioni, Marni built a devoted following for its intellectual and artistically minded approach to clothes. When Castiglioni stepped down in 2016, Francesco Risso was appointed as creative director, continuing the brand's legacy of cerebral design, but with a renewed focus on beauty and craft. Before working for Marni, the Sardinian-born central Saint Martins-educated Risso spent time working for Prada, Blumarine and Alessandro Dell'Acqua. Carlos Nazario is a New York-based stylist who is also global fashion director of ID magazine and a former assistant of Joe McKenna, whose previous clients include Calvin Klein, Nike and Proenza Schouler. Following the Marni Spring-Summer 2024 collection presented in Paris last September, Simon caught up with Francesco and Carlos online to hear about how they met and developed a professional relationship and the ideas behind their work for Marni.
Okay then, so thank you both for joining us on today's In Talks With, which is a fashion special. And today we're talking with Francesco Risso of Marni, who has been the creative director at the Italian house since 2016. And we'll particularly be unpicking his mesmerising Spring-Summer 2024 men's and women's collection, which was shown in Paris at the end of September of this year. And as part of this conversation, we'll also be talking to fashion stylist and consultant Carlos Nazario, who works with Francesco, about how they collaborate, and specifically this most recent spectacular, which was also shown in Karl Lagerfeld's old house. Francesco, let's start going back a little bit and finding out how you came to be at Marni.
Yeah, this happened now. It's funny. I had just like a few days ago, I had my 7th birthday. So it's been 7 years now. I started at Marni in 2016 after a long journey with the Prada house, which was 10 years. Started in 2016 and it was like a beautiful journey from the beginning. I think I was just thinking about this like a few days ago while my birthday was happening, how I feel extremely and beautifully connected with this house, and how somehow it felt like that even when I started. I had this instinct that this place was really right for me. So it happened through meeting Renzo in a very random situation. And and I've worked for a year before getting in the house. So to really clear my vision around what we were going to do together at Marni, with the people that we work with and everything around it, the stores, the fashion shows, the product, everything. So it was a long process before I started.
I've sort of followed you from the beginning of your time at Marni, and it's kind of twisted and turned, and you've really defined an aesthetic, and also like you've challenged, I think, the way of a creative director works in a fashion brand, which has been really interesting to watch. How would you define Marni 7 years with Francesco Risso at the helm so far?
Well, I guess for me and for the people who I work with here and the people that work also outside of this land, but with Marni and me, it's been a big and a long journey into trying to make what we make and make it as a bridge to connecting people, to put people together, to have people in a way really channeling with emotions, to enter into our stores and maybe ask themselves where the fuck are they, or why, and maybe feel lost, but actually finding their own Marni. And this has been the most interesting approach, because for us, because it's been about asking ourselves, do we want to sell to, and do we want to make clothes for, a woman who's smoking a cigarette on the Pont Neuf, or do we want to make clothes for us and for the people, for various people, like from families to artists to very different typologies of peoples. And I think that was the aim, but because that aim is connected with the way we do it, and the way we do it is a multiple hands. It's like a big brain made by many hands.
And that's a really lovely way to talk about the fact that one of the things that I've observed with you being at Marni is how collaborative you've been, and how much you talk about the team around you and the people that you bring into Marni to make the brain function. Talk a little bit to us about your sort of thoughts and feelings, and kind of how you're drawn to collaborators, like, because we're going to talk to Carlos shortly, and it was lovely to hear how you're sort of drawn to people in the
I think it all starts from myself and the need to express within my chosen family. I have grown up in a sort of, I would say, almost like a commune, where there was so many people, many brothers and sisters, grandfathers, grandmothers, my parents, and then they would bring so many people around. And I was really, really young, and I was very silent, and I found my way of expression and my language through clothes. And I didn't even know that was my mission. But back in the days, I was stealing clothes from their wardrobes, cutting them up, repatching it, re-putting them together. And that was my way of talking. It was my medium to say that I was, to dive into my feelings. And I think that's when I decided that that was my mission, to go towards clothes. And then at Marni, that was this big quest to create this language not through just me, but also to the people that are here, that work with us like every day, but the people that somehow in the years they've walked in the shows, they inform the work that we do, they disrupt the clothes that we make, and so all adding to all the people that are working with us, from Carlos and to Dev, Dev Hines, and many others. So it's very hard, from my point of view, to pinpoint on who does what, because I don't even know what I do. I mean, I mean, I just do what I do. I don't, it's very hard for me to consider myself a fashion designer, as the way we tap into so many different realms, and we study and we train ourselves every day to dive into that world in order to better understand it, and therefore make those clothes according to that feeling, is not something that it's made in the common sense of like drawing seven skirts and then having them manufactured through your atelier. So that's how we function here. Obviously, that training, that depth into the mechanism of this exploration is this thing that we protect all together with the people that we work with, starting from Carlos to Dev Hines, and the head of designs. Everyone, we want to connect on that level, and then we make the clothes, or we make the clothes within that exploration. I don't know, like, for instance, like, just to give an example, Dev Hines as Carlos, like, we start the whole process of making clothes from the beginning of the season together. It's not, oh, Dev is coming to make to put some music at the show. We talk about emotions and feelings and whatever we need to achieve together from the beginning. We go and see locations together. We do many things that are part of my land. For instance, like, Dev dives in, or I dive into his land, and equally for the others. So it's a very interesting exchange.
So you've kind of created a sort of Marni commune in your own way.
I hope so, even
That's
though
really funny.
Yeah,
I was thinking about this earlier.
Yeah, actually.
It is funny because and I think I'm hoping that Carlos is laughing, because I also despise the word community. Yeah, because maybe because I still have in my brain the ideology of what a community should be. And so I think refusing the word allows me to actually hunt for it even more. You know what I mean? In the most pure senses, because because the industry right now is made so much with contracts, briefs, and so much structure is around the market that really is, for me, extremely difficult to to allow the word to surf around business meeting, because we want to protect those relationships as if it was a commune. But yeah, maybe the word I despise, but then the way we function together is very much in line with some of the same processes.
But you have kind of brought a kind of artistic studio feeling to the brand. You when you've talked to me about it in the past, like, you work as a studio that's exchanging ideas and trialing things. And obviously you were saying from the beginning of the season, you and your key people gather together and start to think about those things. And so when you first started working with Carlos, I think the first show you did together was the one in New York. Because let's bring in Carlos. Carlos, welcome to In Talks With.
Thank you.
Just talk us through a little bit about how you guys started working together, and what that looked like.
I think we had a very similar friend group for many years, and sort of like occupied similar spaces, and we had a lot of collaborators in common for sure. But somehow we didn't really know each other, and I think I don't really know how we made the initial contact, but somehow we did. And I don't know, the relationship just sort of happened organically. I think we realized that we had a sort of similar intention behind doing, our work, and maybe a similar sort of view of how people are choosing to present themselves right now. And it just felt really natural to try to work together. And, coincidentally, the first show we did together was in New York, which is my hometown. And it really felt like this sort of fateful meeting, that would be our first thing together. And it was, I think, really great. And each show since has been kind of just as eventful and really new for both of us, because, as you know, Francesco has been on a tour for the past 3 seasons. So Japan was our second show together, which I think was kind of, I don't know, it was just such a strange, unique experience to be making something like that in a place that everyone that we were with revered so much, and sort of wanting to do something that felt different there whilst respecting, where we were. And, it was great. And I think the great thing about Francesco was that sort of no matter where we go in the world, and I imagine wherever he goes, he sort of has this magnet of just like-minded, strange people. And so no matter where we go, it's like surrounded by like really like incredible, creative, wacky characters. It's really the only way you can describe it. And it's really sort of like, it's just amazing. So yeah, and Paris was no different.
And before we go on to talk a bit more about your sort of creative collaboration and the Paris show, which I'm super excited to hear you both talk about, just explain a little bit about your role and the way in which your job works and what you do within the context of fashion. Because before we joined the call, we were sort of laughing about how sometimes even our own parents don't entirely understand what our different jobs are. So it would be great to understand a little bit from you, Carlos, about like what you bring to the fashion table.
Oh, that's a big question. It's funny. I think the job of a stylist is really, it's probably one of the least clearly defined roles in fashion. I think it really varies depending on who you're working with. Francesco and I were both on the photography jury this year at the Hier Festival, and everyone's role was like sounded really fancy. And there was like, the director and curator of this, or the creative attaché to this, and whatever. And then it said Carlos Nazario, stylist. And I thought, well, yeah. But I mean, I think with regard to Francesco, I think the way that he works, as he described, is he doesn't really, I think the clothes are sort of an afterthought in a way. I think he really thinks about the world and the intention and the feeling he wants to convey with that particular collection. And, there's text, he will write you a note beforehand, and then the clothes sort of design themselves in a way, or it becomes intuitive, what this person would wear, or how this person wants to be seen. And so with Francesco, he and I mean, he sort of invites me into that journey in various moments, and sometimes it can just be exchanging text messages and getting quick feedback. And then, several times a season, we do sort of a big workshop, if you will, that lasts a few days each. And we meet with all the different teams, and just talk through ideas and track progress. And those have been really amazing sessions, because I think a lot of really incredible ideas are born there. And then once we get to the show, I think it's all hands on deck, just sort of figuring it out, with the casting and the rotation, and should this feel like this? And, everyone comes from Dev, Babak is super involved, and, there's a lot of people. Rachel, such Chandler and Walter are such huge integral parts of, what as Marni, I think. Yeah, so that's sort of my involvement.
And before we jump into talking about the collaboration for Spring Summer, what brought you to fashion? Do you remember like a moment when, because obviously we know that Francesco was cutting up his family's clothes. What were you doing when you were What was your journey into fashion? Any clothes cutting up happening?
I think that is, you'll find a recurring theme in most like gay boys' journey, whether they ended up in fashion or not. I think Francesco was probably better at it, but there was a bit of cutting up clothes for hidden Barbie dolls for sure. Yeah. And I don't know, fashion's all I've ever really done. You know, I grew up in New York and in Queens, but started hanging out in the city in my early teens. And I mean, you know, I'm 35 now, so that was a really incredible time in downtown New York where some amazing people were out and some ideas were being born. And I just met some really great people. And one of them happened to be a stylist, a really successful one at the time. And I was sort of like, hang on a sec, like I'm cooler than this guy. I have way better style. Like I can do this. Like it seems easy. He knows a lot of famous people. It's cool. And then that's sort of where that idea came from. And once I moved to Paris when I graduated from high school, because I really, you know, college just wasn't for me. So I dropped out after like 2 weeks and went to Paris and just sort of figured it out. And it was a long road for sure. I ended up in London at a certain point. I worked for Joe McKenna for 6 years, which is sort of the turning point. And after I left Joe, I just sort of started on my own. And it was a time when a lot of my friends were really starting to have big moments, like Shane at Hood by Air and, you know, Oliver Hadley Perch and just different people in different fields, hair, makeup, like all my friends were sort of like starting to happen. And so it just sort of, you know, just took off from there.
Francesco, do you remember like what drew you particularly to Carlos's work and how you kind of then instigated this moment? Because obviously you worked together on this New York show, but how did it start for you?
My obsession with Carlos.
Yes, tell all, if not sooner.
Well, first of all, I obviously knew about his work, but it's true that we have so many circles and friends in common. And but mostly I was like extremely intrigued to understand more about that brain and how he functions. And he's there's something about his mechanical and yet extremely emotional way of expressing, which is to me very, very fascinating. So I think I was almost like looking for this like a part of the string of this beautiful instrument that we have here, and that was through friends, and that became like an extremely joyful operation. And I'm still extremely intrigued and passionate when we work together to see him. Sometimes I detach and I see people from it's almost like I'm taking like some steps backwards, and I look at people how they work, because it's almost like a sort of like movie for me. And and I'm always so blown away by, again, when I say mechanical, is because I see Carlos becoming like a machine, and so strong and so committed, and equally the most lovingly person I've worked with. And this beautiful. These two beautiful combinations, it's like it really makes our things bloom. But you know, this is when I think about when we're almost there doing, you know, at the end of the process, almost there to do the show, to make the show happen. But actually, the type of conversations that happens at the beginning, again, I see Carlos as this beautiful human merging into our land and us merging into his. And, it's not about him being a stylist, not me about being a designer, not Dev being a musician, not Rachel being a casting director. We really share a lot of our, our aim. I think also for a sense of a future that we all want to be happy in. And I think that's what makes us really aligned and in common to what we want to do, how we want to deliver these these objects into the world as we're moving together as a living organism.
And I guess like that becomes even more critical in the sense when you take a show on the road, which you have literally done. So for people that don't know, like the show for Marni used to be always in Milan, and every season you would have a men's show and a women's show twice a year. And there was a point where you decided that you wanted to pick this up and move it around the globe. And so therefore this idea of this team of people that you bond with, that you talk to, the fact that must become even more important when you're then going New York, Tokyo, Paris. Talk a little bit about why you wanted to take the show on the road. What was the idea behind that, Francesco?
Well, absolutely. I mean, this is actually a great link and such a great example about how we have been moving towards these cities, sort of like between together, like being in the same room and thinking, okay, this is going to be an act of love. So let's just be all together and try to make this as one of the most beautiful experiences in our life, so there's no social market or other type of games behind it. Like it is started from Manifesto when we showed simultaneously in 18 cities around the world. And we gave the camera to our interpreters, to our artists, models, musicians, and they filmed themselves. And then the common ground was...
Sorry, just a little interruption there, just to contextualize. The Manifesto was when it was during the pandemic, when we couldn't do shows as we do them before and now subsequently. So this was your way of showing the collections to the world in this like incredible 18 cities, everyone taking their own photos. Exactly.
So that was the only way we could do it at the time. And that was where we switched in a way. And automatically the travel was the decision to bring Marni to the people that we've been working with and to reconnect, rather than having them come to Milan again or just come to Milan. And it was definitely the continuation of that approach. And us then being together, and then merging with the people there was such a celebration, but also like an incredible learning curve. Because trust me, like going from making a show in New York with the people, with our friends there, and then going to Tokyo the season after is a completely different approach from the way you get to the office in the morning, the way clothes are delivered or alterated, or or even the models and our friends coming in the recipe, completely different dynamics. And it's been incredibly fulfilling for me in my learning experience. Yes.
Which brings us to Paris, which was the most recent show that you guys did at the end of September. And it's called, the show was called And That's How I Found You, Paris, or How You Found Me. Do you want to talk a little bit, Francesco, about when you started thinking about Paris? Like, what were the ideas that started to formulate for you about this particular show?
So we wanted to, let's say, to come closer to our center. You know, we're in Milan and we've been west and then east. So we wanted to get closer again in order to bring the most of our people back together again. Because New York didn't allow everyone to be there, as equally Tokyo didn't allow everyone to be there. So we wanted to get closer for the most of our friends, let's say, to be again in the recipe and to again celebrate our journey. And so Paris was quite automatic after that travel and after the two shows. And the sentence that you're reading, it's part of a letter that I've been writing, I guess, to Paris, because I had different experiences from my childhood to now that brought me at times closer to the city or more far away, sometimes loving it, sometimes hating it. And I guess that show was a gesture to reconnection with the city and that beauty, which is incredibly beautifully overwhelming. It's undeniable. Like the moment you land and the moment you put your steps into the road, then you're immediately filled by that beauty. And and in a way, I had to dive into my past to understand what I have learned in that city. Funnily enough, when I was 13, I had this friend living there, and I used to go and visit her. And I remember this person coming in a room while a party, putting their chin on my knee, and then completely disappearing. And I fell in love, and I spent years, and then I remember, actually, sorry, I'm missing a bit of it. I remember I smelled the fragrance that this person was wearing, and I spent years. I even forgot about this, and I just remembered about this just a few months ago. But I spent years looking for this fragrance, and while I was keeping searching for it, I would go there because I had my store, so I had to buy collections. I would go there for work, and I kept continuing running around the streets trying to find the fragrance. I never found it. I never found this person, but I found this beauty for searching as one of the main things that actually drive me continuously towards my work, towards beauty, towards people. Searching is, to me, almost, it's my honey. And I guess the Paris show, it was a celebration of that searching, of feeling like a flaneur around the streets of Paris. So it really felt like a celebration. And this searching happened also in this year and a half tour, where New York, Tokyo gave so much knowledge to what we do. And again, celebrating this search in Paris and celebrating our flaneur way of being was, in a way, for us, another perfect landing into into a place that it's not our home.
And presumably Paris being this kind of like, you know, very it's kind of, I guess most people think of Paris as being like the home of couture, and it is. So that's kind of also interesting. Carlos, what was your reaction when Francesco said he wanted to do Paris? And as someone who's also lived there, what was your kind of response?
I thought it felt like a natural next stop on the tour, for sure. You know, it's a place that I think we've all spent a lot of time, and I think Paris is a place that most people who work in fashion have their own special relationship with. Most of those relationships are complicated, just like the city. And I think that was true for Francesco, for sure. And, you know, he told me the extended version of the anecdote he just shared with you. And I thought it was really powerful and charming. And yeah. And then when we spoke about his initial ideas for references for, you know, the way he wanted to present the clothes, but also what the clothes would be, I was really very, very excited.
Let's talk about the clothes, because I was trying to work out earlier, I was watching the show again, and I was trying to work out, because I know, Francesco, you spoke a lot around this show about the word joy and the body. Yeah. And I kind of like felt like there was lots of things in this collection that were like the sort of chaotic glamour, then this kind of like very sexy, strict, short, kind of bluntness about it. And it started and it stopped, and then it had these like incredible blooms. For both of you, like, how did these, because in a way, like sometimes it felt like there were two collections that had somehow kind of blurred together, and that was kind of, I think, also echoed by this, like the fact that the models walked inside and then they went into a garden.
Let's say that starting from the idea of this quest for joy, first of all, I mean, I kept obsessing about the fact that joy doesn't come to you on your shoulders and on your heads like the rain. You know, it's actually something that requires a lot of work and commitment. It doesn't just like, you know, it's not a breeze of air and suddenly you are joyful, you know, or you feel the joy. So I think the work on the collection was based on that celebration, but also on the fact that the most amount of work we could do to it, it would have brought this like sense of ecstasy of the hand that we wanted to transmit to people. We wanted to transmit an immediate connection with the senses, and not just like some random virtuality, rather like virtuosity. And virtuosity is in our hands, That passion is in our hands. And you know how passionate I am about protecting all these talents that we have as humans. And and yet chaotic, or let's say exuberant, it was, because on one hand, we wanted to celebrate the power of the body being almost naked. On the other hand, oppositely to that, we wanted to celebrate the power of the hands, making the most insane collages of flowers and 3D metal tin cans coming out of your body. We even made fragrances to go with the clothes, because we wanted those senses to really activate, to really feel like you were slapped by clothes and by our people walking towards these little rooms. You know, I thought, actually, when is the last time we've been touching clothes? It's everything felt so. We wanted it not to feel dry, but to feel that clothes can give you an emotional connection.
And just in terms
yeah.
of the some of the floral pieces, you touched on that slightly there. Just describe, because obviously the downside of a podcast is that we can't see the clothes that you're speaking about, but obviously people can look them up online. But these incredible, these incredible pieces that you created from Fanta and Coke cans, and you turn them into these incredible dresses, which almost like the stems of the flowers, like the flowers became almost like eyeballs. Like, talk a little bit about how you and the studio and Carlos, and how you collectively sort of manifested these, like, they're artworks, really, aren't they? Let's be honest.
Funnily, we had an amazing day with Carlos when we started the journey of those flowers. Because the work was standing on the idea of a continuous search towards a joyful encounter or encountering joy that requires a deep research and a deep work into making. Getting to those flowers at first was about an obsessive, compulsive, relentless research into flowers drawings, flowers pictures, flowers from magazines of like the 18th centuries, flowers from books, flowers of any sort of provenience. And it was about cutting them up, putting them together in worlds of colors. And then there was a moment here in the studio where like hundreds of people were just cutting flowers from paper. And then in order to translate that into the pieces of clothing, we printed every of those images onto this very very neat cotton, like that looks almost like paper, and then glue them together and then stitch them onto our shapes. But then we wanted to grow even more because we weren't satisfied enough ever. So from there, it was we started working with tin cans, literally like Coca-Colas and Fantas and all sorts of things that we could find in the studio. And we started cutting these like metal pieces, gluing them on top of the pictures, painting them accordingly to the color. And then, I think we were looking for a celebration of that from, let's say, a reasonable point of view, and then a completely unreasonable one. So they become metally and they go outside the body. And again, for many times, I was thinking about how Baroque, back at the beginning of it, was for many philosophers has been depowered from its first need, which was to create more pathos, more emotions, coming from a period where actually was all about strictness. I think we were trying to Baroquify our hand. And when you hear Vivaldi and you hear in music, it's very different. For instance, in art, where you feel Baroque is kind of tricking you. But in music, symphonies are really transporting you. So in the same way we wanted people to be touched by clothes, we wanted the audience to feel like the hand in which the hand that was applied to make these pieces was very celebrated, up to the maximum of emotions, and maybe a bit of surrealism there, but again, isn't that the most beautiful thing about what we make, that it's also to not just to not just made to run in the streets, but also to make us think, and to bring us to a land in which we can understand that actually that work is what we do, is about craft, is about making. So I think that was really a celebration of craft at its maximum.
And Carlos, for you, like when you were putting the looks together and styling the collection and working on the show, like what were your feelings about some of the pieces in this show?
It's interesting walking in that first day of show prep, because you've seen the clothes at various points in their process, and I think it is those sort of last few weeks right before the show when a lot of things just accelerate really rapidly, and ideas can just like completely transform themselves. So, you sort of know what to expect, but then a lot of times or at least myself, I'm very surprised at Marni. And these dresses were sort of no different, because the time prior to that had seen them, they were beautiful, but something happened in those last few weeks that really just transformed them into, like you said, artwork. And just the level of intricacy and the scale and the form was so impressive. And one of the first things we did when we got there, all of those metal dresses and the floral collage dresses were long at one point. And so we started to cut them, and watching the team, how like the process that had to go into even cutting them with like pinking shears and pliers, and because of the way that these things are constructed. And I think you don't really sometimes feel that because they look so effortless. But there's incredible amount of work that goes into it. But I think once the initial reaction and excitement wears off, and you start to settle with the clothes, and you start to sort of really figure out how you want to tell the story and what the rhythm should be, and how you sort of incorporate these more these sort of bigger pieces with the things that sort of make up, I think, the flesh of the show. That's really, I think, the interesting part. It's like, how you exercise restraint and release, and also be very respectful of all the work that went into making all of these clothes, because you do want to show as much as you possibly can. But I think that's one of the really great things about working with Francesco, is that he is always very open. I don't think there's anything that is ever like finite, if there's a better way to do it, or a more interesting way to see it. He's always really open to that, and I think it makes for a really great environment. His team is really the same.
When you think about the in this show, there's 62 outfits. Like, when you're looking at the clothes as a group of different looks that are saying different things, how do you think a lot about the pace that the show is going to have, in terms of like what's going to open, because I felt that there was a really interesting pace to this one. Like it wasn't like it felt kind of like it had a real, the music behind it was very kind of like serene in a way, but the pace was quite, I can't think of the right word, like it wasn't chaotic, but there was this kind of like lovely sort of push-pull. How did you think about that?
I think Francesco, he had seen this space, and I think was really inspired by this space even during the process of making the collection. And I think a lot of the choices that were made with this space in mind and what, you know, it meant to be showing in Paris in this way. And so I do think the way that the clothes were presented was very intentional. And I think, you know, I've grown up really going to fashion shows, right? I mean, since I'm 16, 17, sneaking into shows at Bryant Park in New York. So I, you know, and have sat really at various points in that room, from standing to, you know, front row. And I can tell you, like, it's really annoying to watch a messy show. It actually really is. And I think there's a lot of things that as a spectator or an invited guest influence your impression of the fashion. And I am always really sensitive to that in a way that I think, like, Francesco and his team don't give a shit about that, right? And so, and rightfully so. And so I think the result is something that meets really in the middle of something that feels challenging and like new to someone who's seen a million fashion shows, but at the same time sort of respectful of, you know, the people's time and cognizant of certain things that people need in order to receive the message. So I think everything you saw was intentional, and then I think some of it you leave to chance, and that's the brilliant part about, you know, live theater, which Francesco shows are, is that you prepare and then you fucking just, let's see, you know what I mean? but a shoe might break, somebody will miss their turn, like whatever, you know, that's it, that's the show, you know.
And you both talked about the venue itself, and we talked about this at the very beginning, but we can't leave this conversation without discussing the fact that this particular space was formerly owned by the late Chanel designer Karl Lagerfeld. And Francesco, I remember you saying to me that you'd seen this, you'd been shown this space like quite early on in the process, and that you'd been shown loads of warehouses and lots of places that perhaps you might have ordinarily been drawn to, because the show in New York was in kind of like a more sort of warehousey vibe. And tell us what it was. I mean, there's a great story about Karl Lagerfeld that I want you to share with us before we go. But before we go to the great anecdote about Karl, what was it about this space that you were so excited about?
Yeah, it's very well said, because I do try relentlessly not to, you know, it was very strange for me to end up like in a Baroque house and then, like, you know, almost fainting in love with it. But thinking about all our shows, like being in such weird places, but this was such a funny story, because I was in Paris scouting for locations, and I was with Dev and some members of the team, and yes, we went through art communes, squats, all sorts of like possible, I would say, outrageous places. And then somebody says, "Oh, now we're gonna go and see a space in Rue de l'Université," and that clicked into a story of the past where that I immediately shared with the group while we were driving there, and basically, I was spending a lot of time there in Rue de l'Université, because my one of my dearest friends, since we were like 13, I would go and visit her, and we would spend days in her house in Rue de l'Université. Her family owned a house there, at a window, spying on Karl, because they were neighbors. And when I was that young, Karl was already very grown up, and for us was almost like trying to spying on Michael Jackson. He was such an incredible character, and almost like a vampire in a way, coming and going, home. So it was really, really, really funny to try to get that that picture from time to time. So I am telling this story, and they're like, "Oh, come here. We're gonna show you this hotel particulier." We enter this house. They give us a tour of the house, and at the end of the tour, the man who's managing the space just said, "Oh, and this was Carl's house." So we all gagged in that moment, and I felt I was almost going to faint because it was such a weird comeback to those years. And I thought, this is it. But
this is what they
yeah,
genuinely call a fashion moment, isn't it?
yeah. And also, while I was there, I thought I still have goosebumps when I talk about it, because I got very emotional, not because there was like this deep connection with a funny story of my past, but also because this man not just was like building up one of the most iconic characters of fashion and of expression in general, but he dedicated all his life to work and to a search for beauty, and that is undeniable. It's for me, it is such an inspiration to know that you can actually live a life with such deep commitment, and I guess that's the joy that I was looking for. So when I go back to thinking about this act of joy, I think about commitment. I think about people that actually inspire that. And and yet, Carl, there's no better example of someone who dedicated almost all his life to, to his work.
And that obviously did also change as Carlos was saying, that this shifted the collection slightly, the venue itself.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the house is an intricate combination of rooms, and however, this decision came even before designing the clothes, because most of times, actually every time, the place in which we make our dramaturgy, let's say, informs completely our clothes. That's the environment where we are setting our message. And at times, while I was developing the collection, I felt, oh my God, like I cannot see this like pink thing, like imagine with this, like golden Baroque walls. Like at times it was very hard thinking about how we normally function. But I guess there was like such a celebratory need, and I think the house informed the need for the senses to be activated, the need to welcome people as if we were welcoming into our home, and as if you're just like having a tea in that place, and you sit on a couch together and you can touch those clothes, you can touch those feelings in a way. So the rooms had that theatrical effect on us, let's say.
We have two more questions and then we must unfortunately wrap up our fabulous conversation. I'd love to hear from both of you, like, how do you, when you've been building towards such a monumental moment, and that this show felt like another one of those for Marni, how do both of you kind of come down from this high? Like, how do you, when you stand back and the show is finished, like how do you feel? Like, what do you do afterwards?
We never come down. No, I don't know. I don't know. I leave this to Carlos.
No, it's true. I mean, I think the gift and curse of fashion is that you very seldomly get a chance to sort of revel in the glory of whatever you've just done. You know, I think you're always sort of thinking about what's next. Actually, I think this show, it felt special, and I think the response to it was special, and I think people really connected with it, and so there was a lot of feedback, and I think that always feels good when you know that people felt, you know, what you were trying to convey. But I'm not super nostalgic, and neither is Francesco. And I think, you know, I think he was on a plane like the next day to LA to like teach.
Yes.
And I think I was like, I'm sure on a plane the next day back to do, you know, something else. So we, you know, we celebrated that night, and I think we were already thinking about how to make the next one even better.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
lastly,
for sure.
for both of you, because like I would love to find out more about the next one, but I imagine it's a bit too soon. Although I'm sure you're both plotting it. Tell us on the one thing about fashion that people listening to this conversation might not know. What's the one thing about fashion that they should know?
Who's answering first?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like people know a lot about fashion. I think, you know, the social media has served as this great equalizer. And as we started, too much, no?
Exactly. I was going to say that maybe people think that they know too much. They think they know
fair.
too much about it.
I think so, but I think that fashion and like any sort of pursuit where you're trying to monetize making things, or, you know, art, if you will, is just sort of bizarre. And I think you sort of have to be in it to understand what it actually feels like. But yeah, I think all the things that people think they know about it are true. It's wacky and weird and emotional and really, really, really hard, and sometimes relentless, but endlessly rewarding and really fun.
Any last words, Francesco, from you?
Yeah, I would say that I haven't understood yet what is fashion myself. and so I think that is the openness that we have to keep in our eyes and brains and heart, because isn't fashion this like movement of people? You know, it's like fashion doesn't exist with the bodies and people, so there's always and will always be a mystery about it, that it's going to be always unresolved, about seeing and overseeing what it's really, really is about. Because it comes with us, and it comes with, you know, with all the things that happen in the world. So the dynamics and the recipe, it's so intricate. It's not just the industry. It's not just us making it. It's how we all react on it. So I think we always have to know that we cannot know 100%.
Thank you both very much for this lovely conversation. I'm going to say that the one thing that you should all do after listening to this podcast is go to marni.com. Anyway, thank you both very much, and we'll speak soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You've been listening listening to In Talks with me, Danielle Radoichin. The sound and theme music is by Woogie Productions and the artwork is by Patrick Waugh. If you enjoyed this episode, please pass it on to someone who you think might also like it. Please subscribe and leave a review. To pitch for guest ideas, you can DM me via my socials at Danielle Radoichin. Thanks for listening.